Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Um, if you've been watching these videos for a while, you're probably aware I have not been posting a few individual videos, just thoughts I've been having randomly, but I haven't really done any dialogues with anybody like I was before. And mostly I've been really busy writing this anthology chapter on dialogos and circling that it'll be published, I believe, next summer as an anthology with a bunch of other people that I've talked with on the channel. So I've been putting this on hold, the channel on hold as I attempt to write my first academically inclined paper. I already have I've been given 2 breaks on getting it in by the deadline. So I think this weekend is the last one. However, I wanted to talk with Gregg about this experience of social fluency and intelligence and other kinds of brilliance, and when they don't match up, the complications with that, and what his perspective was on that, especially because Gregg, he's a psychologist, psychotherapist who's basically written a unified field theory for psychology. It's very complex and brilliant, and I'm just getting to know him more and what he calls the tree of knowledge. So it's really quite a system. So I wanted to get his perspective on this, and it was a really great conversation. And enjoy. Announcements. I think we're just about full on the outer circling course, but if you're interested, the links are below. You need to act on that quickly because I think we're going to cap it here. But check it out if you're interested. The links will be below. We have every Thursday for circling. We have an open to the public event. That's 6. The times changed very recently. It's 6 to 9 p.m. And the link for that is below. You can sign up through our Facebook channel. We also have a brand new website, which is pretty cool. And then if you're interested in working with me one-on-one, my email's below, and email me, and I can contact with you and let you know how much it costs and what it's like, and we can talk. All right. Enjoy your weekend. There you go. Welcome back, my friend.
Very nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
This is actually going to be the first video I've done in a while because I put everything on pause when I seriously started writing for the thing. So I'm just right at they extended the deadline a couple times for me.
Did you get it in?
It's going to be in. I'll have it turned in by tomorrow. So my first kind of academically inclined paper, which has been really interesting. But so I just put a pause on all the videos until I got that done. But
gotcha.
It's interesting because just to set this up for people, I think I was working with a client, and I was just present to this, and I figured I was thinking about it, and then I was thinking about you in your tree of knowledge, right? And all the conversations that we've had so far, and I thought, like, I'm just going to shoot him an email, just say, like, what do you think about this? And I was, as I was writing that email, I was like, actually, I have a feeling that this probably would speak to a lot of different people, right? And particularly the thing I brought up with you was, I've been working with people, in a pretty deep way for like 22 years or so.
Yep.
Through leading courses and teaching and doing one-on-one work and working with families. And so I've noticed I've had a bunch of clients that I would say you know, a lot of them having, you know, you could almost say like a genius level IQ, right? And or brilliant in some other kind of way, and then I'll start working with them, and as we start to kind of like work through stuff, and usually it has a lot to do with about their, you know, coaching them around their relationships, right?
Yep.
And as they start to work through their relationships, right, the companies that they're forming and all those things start to become successful. But one of the things I've noticed is that that success is kind of complicated, right? Because they were so kind of socially coordinated, right? Or socially awkward or socially, you know, clumsy. Their relationships with people through their lives was just filled with lots of rejection and lots of pain, right?
Yep.
However, they were bright enough to kind of know the whole time that they were right about whatever it was that they were looking at, or they had a perspective that they could see that was true.
Yep.
But whenever they tried to bring it out in the world, because whatever's going on with them socially, it just wouldn't work out, or they get rejected, or people wouldn't pay attention to them, or all these different kinds of things. So when they start to get successful, and then people start to recognize, right, their particular brilliance, it's on one level, it's incredible, but a second later, after it comes, there's this experience of, well, this has been true the whole time, right? Right. And it's complicated because it comes with, to kind of become successful, they have to kind of work through this whole world of social dynamics, right? Of relationships in which they experience lots of rejection, lots of, you know, lots of things that come with, you know, being socially awkward, right?
Yes.
And it begged, you know, and so I wrote you, and the question I had is, I just started to think about, you know, if there does seem to be a pattern around this, right? Like that's, I'm imagining somewhere is measured at somehow, but like this sense of somebody can be incredibly brilliant, but yet it seems like that brilliance takes all the energy, right, from the social coordination, right, or the social sphere, and but then because they can't be social, they can't make their relationships work, right? The world ends up missing out on their perspective or on their brilliance. And it's like, I was wondering about, what is it about, is there a way that evolution, in your understanding or in your map of your tree of knowledge, does it make sense? Is there like an evolutionary reason, right? One, that just happens, right? That somebody really, really with a high IQ or a genius in some level seems to can equate a lot of times with, you know, a lot of like social discoordination.
Sure.
Right.
Yes. There's a pattern there.
And then the other thing is, you know, what is it about, right? The thing about, why does nature select or run like social criteria so high, right? In a certain sense that you can it actually can miss the intelligence that's in it, right?
Sure.
Like, so just kind of, I wanted to see what your perspective was about.
Yeah. So there's first off, I definitely have seen this clinically. I've actually experienced some of this. So, I'll be happy to share some about this.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about just some of the basic dynamics here. So let's say you have a kid who's got an IQ of, say, 145. Okay, so, and again, I don't want to reify the numbers too much, but just that's somebody who's in the 99th plus percentile. Okay, and that means that the way they process information, the efficiency with which they process information, the ease with which they extract out patterns, either verbally or perceptually. Okay.
Yep.
And then the creativity with which they might juxtapose new ideas and start to look at new possibilities operates significantly outside the norm. Okay. Now, if their talents are aligned with what the edge of what that group wants, then they can be seen as geniuses and then realized for that. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you get alignment where you're like, oh my gosh, you know, you happen to have a musical genius, we'll say,
right,
and their talents in jazz or in classical, and they grow up in a classical and talents, and they're the great star, or they have an athletic ability and they become the great quarterback, and then everybody sees them, and then and then they have that trajectory, and then they're sort of known and valued for their unique talent, and these are the people we're jealous of in the world. Right? These are the people, look at Brad Pitt, you know, or whatever imagined projection of attractiveness, of status, of placement that makes us, those that don't feel that, jealous. Okay.
Yeah.
So when there's an alignment, then you see that alignment. But there's many times not going to be alignment for a whole host of different reasons.
right,
Okay. So if you have a kid who's 12 and all of a sudden, you know, let's say logs on and listens to Daniel Schmachtenberger, you know, okay, and can follow what's going on in relationship to what Daniel's saying, and all of a sudden that kid starts to think, wait a minute, because he has the capacity to start tying stuff together, starts getting worried about the current state of civilization.
right,
Right. All right. And starts then tracking this. Then he comes back to his friends. Okay.
yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately his friends are going to be, you know, his friends are talking about girls and, you know, the latest TikTok thing and who's on Instagram and who's getting likes. Right. And they're like, what is that? They don't have any frame of reference.
Right.
Okay. And if you don't then have a frame of reference, there's a Dunning-Kruger effect, which is basically you can only understand competence at your level of competence. Okay. You can't understand, you can sort of see, okay, that kid's like a smart nerd, but I don't have any clue what he's talking about. Okay. And I don't know what it is that I can, benefit from that. So it's just outside what the normative structure, which is going to get most of the attention and social influence too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Right. So now the kid's got a choice, basically, you know, or at least is faced with many kids then feel this is sort of the draw of the interests or the popularity, social engagement.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And for a subset of people here, there will be actually sort of a hyper androgyny, which actually is a hyper masculine way of thinking that tiptoes into the ASD spectrum. That's the autistic disorder spectrum, which will be sort of an analytic, logical way of thinking. Okay, that is actually overemphasizes things like deductive, inductive reasoning, and doesn't pick up on socio-emotional nuance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So now you're going to intersect a number of different things. You have somebody that's really interested, really curious, capable of doing certain kinds of logic induction.
Yeah.
All right. That far outshoots topics that their peers are interested in.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, they lack a particular type of nuance or socio-emotional popularity, checking in on what's called relational field dependence, which is like, where's that other person and how much am I tracking them?
Yeah.
Okay. So this creates a very potentially alienating experience because the interest in investment is like, wow, this is really important stuff. Why doesn't everybody else see this? This is important.
Yeah.
And they don't. And at the same time, as you talk about it, the rest of the crew looks at you and says that we find that you're a weirdo. You're a nerd. You're a geek. What are you?
Right. Right.
And we have, all of us, except for a very unusual disposition or constitution, we want to be known and valued for what we our true self. Okay. And the ideal is when you have a unique capacity that you are able to give and are loved for it.
Okay? Yeah.
A very confusing thing is when you feel like you have a unique capacity, right, that you can see is right, and then other people just find it actually works against you in a particular way.
Yeah, totally.
That's a clusterfuck experience, right? It's like,
right.
And so that's going to be tough for people to metabolize if they don't have a mentor, if they don't have a deep friend that they can give voice to and get a narrative that allows them to hold this emotion and this socio-emotional need. What they're going to do is they'll compartmentalize it. Generally, they'll get counter-dependent. Okay, counter-dependent is I don't need other people.
Right.
Screw them. Okay. Right. So after the injury and then the ineffectiveness and then the isolation and then the passion, and then you're just sort of like, boom, I'm going to cut off this need. You got to become counter-dependent. Of course, the need rarely doesn't go away. You basically just pretend self-consciously that your subconscious primal need for belonging and connection and to be known and valued, you just basically compartmentalize it and minimize it.
Yeah.
Okay. But that doesn't mean that you're healthy. Does that resonate?
Yeah, it does. Well, it's interesting because, as you were talking, I started to realize, like, actually what I think a lot of people, and it's because this goes obviously beyond just my clients, because I've seen, different people in the Bay Area, like there's clusters of people I'm connected with that are just, they're smart beyond belief, right? And I started to notice that there's like almost a, what is the word? Like almost a sociopathic strain in them, right? Of where, and I think I kind of heard the rub of that quality of utter frustration of here you are, and you got something right, but the more you try to present that around you, it's not being seen, it's not being counted for, but it's true, but then you're not able to it's not able to be recognized, right? And then these people are liked or whatever, or become successful. There's seems like that there's like a nihilistic, right? A nihilistic, deep rage and frustration, I would imagine.
Yes. Yep. Right. Yeah. So think about the dynamic. So you have a sense that you can see things better than others. Okay. You want to be loved for that initially, and then you're rejected, in a way and you can't figure out exactly why.
Right.
So then you cut off the need to see the need to be loved out of actual resentment, although you justify it as by saying you don't need it. But you're also then feeling that you're superior.
Yep.
Okay. So the dynamic of feeling superior and already have cut off the need to have somebody loved is going to set you up for basically a narcissistic debasement of the other.
Yeah.
Right? Meaning, like, I'm just better than those bastards. Who the hell gives a shit about them?
Right.
It doesn't take long to get into that, and then you think you're being distant, but you're actually also resentful.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the word, resentment.
It's a hidden resentfulness for not being, because a part of you knows that you'd be so much more happier and fulfilled if you were being loved and having the capacity to give the contribution. Right.
Right.
And if you go a long period of that, and then all of a sudden it switches, right? So then you start becoming successful,
right?
And then you start getting pulled into this, place, all right? It's a weird contrast. Now, all of a sudden, lots of different things will start to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. To be pulled into this, it will feel very gratifying on the one hand.
Yep.
All right. But you're going to say things like, well, it was there all along. Okay. So now what? Everyone just loves me because they're following the herd. You know, it's a herd mentality. It's like they don't really see it. Look, no one could see it before. Now they see it. And it's, you know, just because I have 6,000 likes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You know? I mean, and for me, I've been working on my theory forever. 20 years from now, I'm really famous. Everyone wants to talk to me. It's like, well, why didn't you want to talk to me before?
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
and you already prepared yourself to say, I don't like this. I don't need to like this, right?
Yeah.
And this, it's sort of like weird and scary. And then you have to go back and say, well, was I really hurt before, right? Like, or am I really going to just sour this to stay, maintain my consistency?
Yep. Yep.
So it's there's a lot of socio-emotional conflict that's this entire trajectory is going to bring.
Yep.
And unfortunately, especially if you're in a Silicon Valley thing, you go into the computer engineering and the algorithmic, right? Ian McGilchrist, the master and his emissary, right? You know, makes a very nice point, which is the logos of the Western Hemisphere is really, we have given enormous power to that. Okay? So you can be socialized into science, logic, Google algorithms. That's what's real, right? And really then, you know, be prepared to sort of have a disconnect between your heart. You know, heart is that's the passions. Who cares about that?
Yeah.
Actually, the real structure is we should be deploying our logic to organize our passions, not controlling and disconnecting them. But a Google world, or I'm not dumping on Google, but I just mean the Silicon Valley world's got a potential really to drive that kind of thinking home. And if it does, the alienation from the relational world, from the heart world, the whole circling attachment world, it's very, very potential.
Yeah. Yeah. You said you went through some of that stuff.
Yep.
Can you share some about that?
Yeah, sure. You know, another thing that I'll say, and certainly this is true for me, you know, what does it mean to be smart is a big deal in our society. And you know, it's and then to feel like you're smart, but to be not recognized for it it sets up, you know, inner conflicts.
Right.
Yeah. So my story, you know, my oldest brother, I born into a high education family. Both my parents have doctorates. So, you know, education is emphasized. My oldest brother is valedictorian of a class of about 800 people, so a very high achiever. My older brother, very smart, but actively rebelled against academics. So he didn't do very well, but was seen as charismatic and charming and quick on his feet and all of that. Yeah. And I had a bit of a learning disability. I was not a good reader. So I'd swap my B's and D's. And not being a good reader made my academic achievement through elementary and middle school not that great. And I didn't find it to be very meaningful. Kinds of stuff I was intuitively drawn to. And all of that made my father, who had and I'm very close to my dad, but we processed this. This is was an issue over time. My father had a fixed attribute theory of intelligence. Okay? Fixed attribute means that this is the idea that you're born with a particular, you know, we could pull it out of you somehow and measure it. And you're like, oh, okay, my dad would that guy's unbelievably smart. That guy's pretty smart. That guy's average. And then once you fall into my dad's category, you know, then you're basically tattooed with that category. Okay. And actually in the world of psychology, you may have heard the difference between fixed and growth mindsets. Like a growth mindset is when you really are helping people realize not that intelligence is very easily thought of as, you know, as a learning structure, developmental thing. If you don't get something right, it's because you can learn and do something more, that you learn from your mistakes, as opposed to, well, that's diagnostic of whether or not what your, you know, innate ability is.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Different people have different frames of what intelligence is. And there's certainly some truth to both of them in some ways, but different people did. So anyway, my father was one of those people who would see sort of in a conservative, established way, whoever were the absolute experts, that he intended to defer to them and grant them status. Okay? And I was then placed as, you know, not very bright by my father.
Right.
And I didn't in my up into my middle and high school years, that basically was part of my identity. That was not, I didn't struggle with that.
Yeah.
Okay. I was sort of I was kind of a get along, go along, a pretty easy type, the stereotype was type B personalities, like, hey, I don't need to achieve. I don't have super high conscientiousness of trait levels, and I'm an easygoing guy kind of deal.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
But it's also the case that it turns out that I was a late bloomer, and the way I bloomed was really kind of unique, and then the blooming of that, I was a late bloomer, and the way I bloomed was, kind of unique and weirdly unique, really, quite frankly, at least from a first person perspective. I mean, you go around and say, well, yeah, I built a unified theory of knowledge. Okay, that's a weird thing to believe. It's like, yeah, I've solved some of the hardest problems in the history of mankind, and I do believe that, and it's weird though, right?
Yeah.
So especially to have a professor father. Okay, so went through a whole process. I remember. So what happened in undergrad is I started to bloom in undergraduate, and I taught myself basically. I read enough so that then I could actually read, and then read with efficiency. And then when I could read, that helped. Reading helped. It's like, now you can actually, all right, And then when I sort of overcome whatever dyslexia I had, then I could be. And I had a great mentor who's actually still he's on the TOK executive committee. He's only 10 years older than I, but he was a new doctoral ABD professor in sociology, and introduced me to theory, and I took some feminism classes, and I just woke up, and then whatever my schematic system was a sponge for, it's essentially, it's a social science coherence capacity that I have. I can just basically absorb social science theory with an enormous amount of ease. It takes me an abstract to read something, and I was like, oh, I know what that person's saying. I don't need to read the rest of it. And then
social science. I don't know if I've ever heard of anybody point that out. Easy to read social science theory. You can get it like that. Because can you summarize basically what is it about a social science theory that is rockable enough? Is it presented in a particular way? Like, like math is presented often in numbers and formulas. What's the thing that you're grokking actually?
It's a good question. I have a very intuitive, analytic, intuitive understanding of the socio-emotional processes of human beings.
Yeah.
So it's just sort of like, it's like some people understand computers really well. It's like, I just know how people work.
Right. Yeah. Now that part, would you say that has been online in a way that was interesting to you, like through your whole life, and then it just academically blossomed later in life?
Yeah. So I knew I wanted to be a psychologist because I could talk to people really easy and immediately empathize where everyone was coming from. So like in my family, when I was 10, people would be coming to me and I could understand, oh, dad thinks this and mom thinks this and my brothers thinks this, and this is why we all get along this way. And the best thing we should do is this.
Right.
Okay? So that intuitive capacity to empathize with people was always present.
Yeah.
It wasn't really recognized as a real intellectual skill. It was just present. And as my mom would say, well, you be the glue of the family. Everyone comes and checks in with you and gets sort of easily mirrored by you.
Is that actually recognized as an intellectual skill now?
Well, it depends on who you talk to, but certainly like if you go into the multiple intelligences world of Howard Gardner, he talks about both personal and social intelligences.
Yeah.
Okay, so it would fall into that category of being able to be aware of self, aware of others, intuitively track, this social dynamics.
Yeah. Totally.
Like it just all the little nuances of people's facial expressions, their gestures, their tones of voice, that just pops for me in relationship to their affective positioning.
Yeah.
So, that's.
So like literally, and then, you could read a person's affective positioning in some way that I'm sure it's almost impossible for you to explain how you do it. It's more like you just kind of show
Yeah,
up.
you just sort of like,
you that
you know, it's like, and then I'll ask my students, I'll be like, well, what do you see what's going on there? And they're like, well, the person, I don't know, they were just talking about this thing. It's like, no, they were saying this, and then they had this insecurity, and then they compensated for this way, and then they said this, and then they were defended against this, right? Yeah. They're like, what?
Yeah.
And I was like, I mean, you know, that's pretty obvious.
Here's the thing, like, and the, yeah, totally.
And then you just sort of like, well, isn't that what's going on? It's like, no, I just thought they were just telling this story. It's like, well, yeah, but if you listen to the juxtaposition bouncing of why did they justify this, and then they did this, and then they told this story, and then look at their facial expression and blah, blah, blah. So, you know, it's just, right. That's part of intelligence, is to have certain schema that's really good at pattern detection.
Yeah.
And that happened to be mine. And the combination of that and not being able to be read and being in a family where intelligence was really overly assessed in terms of, you know, academic achievement.
Right.
Infused in that way. That happened. And then when I overcame my academic limitation, and then also realized that, you know, hey, I can now understand this domain of academia in a particular way. So I can read feminist theory and instantaneously be like, oh my gosh, yes, white men do this, and then they justify it this way, and then they're going to dictate power, and I do that. Oh my God! Now I really, you know, a couple of articles in feminism, and now it's like I'm just so completely awoke to, you know, the power structures. In fact, I even brought it home, and we had a, you know, my mom was going through some transitions anyway, and it was important in our family because I had 3 other brothers, and we were definitely male dominated, and my dad was, you know, we said we were more egalitarian than we were, that's for sure. And this opened my eyes to it. But in terms of there was an evolution that happened to me from, say, 19 to 27, 28.
Right.
Where I essentially went through a whole nother layer of developmental education, and shot into a series of steps that took me thinking about the world. And an evolutionary stage model, you know, if you want to do an integral thing, and start climbing up the developmental stages. And you know, was quickly, you know, so I jumped into green, postmodern with feminism, you know, and then started seeing critical theory, and quickly evolved out of my modernist perspective. And then by, you know, 93, I was then in my master's degree, I quickly was interested in psychotherapy integration. So I was then quickly drawn into a more integral place, and just was intuitively convinced that that each one of these things is playing an instrument, and there is an overall music to this, to the cosmos here. And I'm on my, you know, I'm just drawn to ask questions to try to elucidate that. So that's kind of the journey at the level of the ego dynamic. That's a whole nother layer of I'd be happy to share, but that's the sort of the intellectual awakening took that trajectory.
It's interesting. I don't think that people think about empathy. It's interesting thinking about that, like, because I wouldn't have thought that empathy was about a kind of intelligence. I would have thought about it as an emotional thing until it was time to teach people how to circle. And then I realized that no, there are all these things that I'm perceiving, that I put together, that are happening kind of in an instant, right? And it's as I'm trying to explain this back or describe it, which is not easy to do, right? That's a whole exercise of an intelligence that is like, does not come easy. But yeah, I was like, oh, there's a whole, in order to get where you're coming from, it isn't just you have feelings over there that I pick up on and feel them with you. Like, it's like there's empathy is being able to grok the way the world's coming at you, why it's coming at you that way, like what you're probably thinking about that person, and what you think about them, and and then therefore the world and time, and it's like like all of these dynamical distinctions come into somebody's experience, right?
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
what's interesting to me is I'm curious about for you, like with this one, is there is an emotional component though around it. If there's
Oh,
there's a
yeah.
reading, like there's a reading component of their emotions and being able to get the meaningfulness of their emotions,
Mhm.
um, and what all that presupposes. But then there's the process of being in relationship to it. It's not. It is one of feeling. I find it's one of like empathy is one where you get their position and you have this experience. For me, it's like this experience of like, of course, like
Right.
the world makes sense understanding you. It's like
Right.
I feel relief in that
Mhm.
you make sense to me,
Right.
right? And there's a
Yes,
mutual,
absolutely.
like there's something about a heartful intelligence that seems to be
Mhm.
really close to the cognitive part of that.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely. I mean, for me, so, and if I go into the unified theory language of this,
yeah,
okay, this is your intuitive influence matrix,
right.
okay, which
Yeah,
immediately places the person in this socio-emotional self-other world,
right.
okay, in both the here and now and the developmental trajectory of it,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
So it's just like, what is the social sphere of influence in the developmental history of the matrix of
mhm,
social and emotional experiences,
right,
okay,
right.
that heart intuitive system has, and how does it connect to how they're narrating it to themselves and to me right now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And for whatever reason, my architecture just had that online. I was like,
yeah,
I could just sort of like, boom, and I could take mine and then I can jump into your matrix,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and be like, oh, absolutely, yes. If you had this, and this was your mom, and this was your
yeah,
dad, and this is the context in which you were, and this was the way you were traumatized by this event, and this is how you thought about it. Now we
mhm,
bring it through the developmental trajectory. Of course, you'd be feeling right now these
yeah,
conflicts.
right, right.
Mhm. And yeah, that's a particular kind of
Huh,
ability slash intelligence.
yeah,
It's a reasonable term to use for it.
yeah, intuitive. And by intuitive, what makes it intuitive? What is your definition of intuitive in that sense?
Well, intuitive in
You,
that sense would basically be the more, it's not necessarily, I mean, now I can actually give logos analysis to it. Say,
yeah,
oh, okay, yeah. But a lot would be, normally the issue is just the ability to do it.
yeah,
Okay, sort of like, in other words, and then you ask them propositionally, like,
yeah,
how do you do that? And you're like, well, I mean, isn't it obvious, right? And it's like,
yeah,
no, because if we had somebody on the spectrum here who asked these questions, the person would be completely clueless,
yeah,
okay, about what the other person was feeling, right? I
right,
mean, that would be, so
right,
that's the big ability difference,
yeah,
right? I mean, that's one of the defining features of
yeah,
just descriptively of individuals on the spectrum is that they have significant blind spots.
mhm,
Simon Baron Cohen called it mind blindness,
yeah,
which they don't, it's very hard for them to jump into this intuitive, empathetic
right,
mode for somebody else and see the world through the other
yeah,
person's
yeah,
experience. So they just don't have quite the architecture.
yeah,
Um, and that's perspectival and participatory knowing, to use some John terms,
yeah,
which means that your self-conscious ability to actually know exactly what you're doing,
mhm,
is hard. It's more like, can you ride the bike? You get on the bike and you ride it. That's procedural knowing.
yeah.
How do you do that? I don't know. I pedal. It just kind of comes. It seems like it's easy, or it's not. But then everything else is just sort of a weak
Right,
description of it.
yeah,
So that's what intuitive would be, more those nonverbal,
yeah,
just display of skill or the absence of skill.
yeah,
That would then be just, people try to post hoc rationalize what's going on, but usually if
mhm,
you listen carefully, they don't offer rich descriptions.
mhm, right, right, totally. So the part about, I mean, do you know, is there an evolutionary reason that you understand, if it's even fair to even put it like this, but like that you would that nature or genes or evolution would select for this, you could say, extreme intelligence, and then over the social coordination, right?
Hmm. Um,
Why oftentimes there's that imbalance, and it seems, I think it's, I don't know, and this may be because I just live in the Bay Area and that there's just more and more people that come here that are super smart because of the tech industry, but my understanding is people on the spectrum is like 20 times more than it's been in like the last 20 years than it was.
Right. So there's
increasing.
so there's a whole host of issues here.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'd put it. I mean, we get into there's the basic frequency distribution of talent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So any cluster of talent is going to have a normal distribution.
Yep.
All right. And it probably is the case that if you go, I think it's reasonable. I don't really like Howard Gardner uses multiple intelligences. I think that gets a little confusing, but believe me, there are definitely multiple clusters of ability sets.
Yeah.
Okay. Multiple clusters of ability sets. And actually those ability sets at a general level, there is a general positive, weak positive correlation through all of them. There actually is a constitutional functionality.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I know you have 140 IQ at the verbal analytic level,
yeah,
chances are you will be above average on your socio-emotional ability.
Huh. Right.
Correlationally, so they will
right.
But that's a huge difference if I'm looking at you and saying, wow, look at how unbelievably smart you are in this domain, but you have the equivalent of a 105 IQ at the socio-emotional intelligence, you're going to get a contrast effect. You're going to be like, that guy's really brilliant over here.
Right.
Okay. Right. And quite frankly, what you're going to see often, there are some sex differences here. Okay. So you're going to see, say, really high, the more common pattern then is a high IQ male who has instrumental intelligence that allows them to, engage in computer engineering and solve algorithms, and then have a very intelligent wife, but the distribution of her intelligence is going to be a lot more likely to be in the socio-emotional access to relational dynamics. Okay.
Yeah.
So then what you see then is, a rich, intelligent woman saying, why does my very, very smart husband seem so underdeveloped in his capacity to attend to those nuanced relational dynamics and tell me how he feels?
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
All right, here we are. That's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Exactly.
So,
yeah.
So there are these different distributions of intelligence that will weakly correlate. I certainly think then there's the other issue about whether our diet, our lifestyle, the technological world that we live in are breeding us to develop certain kinds of intellectual abilities and greatly underdevelop some of the socio-emotional abilities. There are lots of good reasons. Think about what we used to live in, hunter-gatherer bands. Everything is deep, rich relation with oral narrative negotiation in a group setting where everybody knows everybody over time, deeply well. You're related or deep friends engaged in serious life and death activity together, and you all have to depend on each other.
Yeah.
Then the network of relational harmony versus sitting in your room looking at Instagram, trying to get likes, solving math problems, right? Yeah. It's just a radically different environment for really an impoverished environment for many kids into adults that don't afford the ongoing development of this nuanced relational matrix embedded in real oral indigenous relational processes over time. So I think that there's good reason to think that we have created a society that's going to give rise to people who are impaired in their richness of their capacity for sophisticated relating.
Right, totally. I think it's happening at such a rate. I mean, it's literally happening at such an exponential rate that I don't even think we're aware that we're doing a huge experiment.
Right. Everyone needs to be aware. This is an unbelievable. I mean, yeah, every generation has accelerated the difference from where we used to live farther and farther.
Yeah.
And evolutionary psychologists call this mismatch, the mismatch of the evolved environment that we're prepared for from the environment that we're born into.
Right.
And this was acceleratingly different. In the 1950s, this was unbelievably different. And now with digital, I mean, the digital is taking the difference and just putting on steroids. And so that's why, we're from a TOK perspective, we're at the fifth joint point. We need everyone to wake up, because the danger of change, of rapid change, so dramatic change, and then being so alienated from our natures. I mean, it's already going to happen in a devastating way, but we have to work super hard to keep it from spiraling out of control. I mean, we need people who can bridge that and know what the heart needs, and we need to figure out how to have social relations. Circling and experiences to the heart, get some nourishment. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's what we've talked about this before too, but that's one of the reasons why I think circling, even how it ended up spreading, right, on so many different levels everywhere. It's on one level, it says something about the methodology, but it also, and I think even says more about the time we're in, that people are starting to.
I think you would have had a hard time selling that to hunter-gatherers. They would have been like, what are you talking about? I mean, we sit around talking to each other all the time.
Exactly.
That's what the fire is. We do that already.
Shut up. Right?
It's like,
there's so much relating.
They would have had little private wood spaces so you could at least get away from some of the immersion. That's what is sold back then. But here, no doubt, it's the heart is undernourished at the relational level. And circling is such a, it gets right to the authentic connection. Then people feel it, and they've intuitively known that they haven't had that fed. But then when it's fed, it's like, oh my God, what have we been missing? Right?
Yeah, totally. And it does seem like, well, one, I've noticed that there is an experience. When people have that experience, they know there's that's possible, right? And that just having a new horizon open up that feels like a memory that you've never had, right? Like you've never had it, but they remember, like, oh, it's almost like, oh, where have I been my whole life? I remember you. That never happened. Yeah. That's because horizon, that will reorganize things, right?
Totally. Because at least from an influence matrix perspective, which says that you carry that unconscious memory, and that's good evolutionary sense. You have templates for understanding what it is to be known and valued.
Yeah.
And then if you're not, you deny them and pretend like it's not.
Yeah.
But then when it comes flooding in,
right,
it's an archetypal experience. It is like, oh my gosh, this is what it's like to be known and valued. Yeah. And the entire body responds.
Right.
Okay. Because it really is like a memory of what it is like to be loved over the generations. We have that. We're ready to see that. And if you haven't seen it, and then all of a sudden you feel it, the entire system gets recalculated, organized. Definitely.
Totally. And and you can't argue with it. When somebody's experienced it, it's almost like it's synonymous with I don't know, a spiritual experience that you have to experience, but you realize that there's a sense in which, oh my God, my nervous system is designed. Just had that. And all we did is we sat across from each other and we made sounds, right? In a relatively rhythmic way. And my whole worldview looks different. And I think, I was going to ask you about this too, because I was, as I'm writing this, a lot of what my section is about is more than I was imagining it was going to be about, is about this sense of about the running away sense of technology, right? And as a, as a pretext for, looking at circling and dialogos, and now it goes into dialogos. Well, why does it even make sense? And so I actually ended up going through Heidegger's whole notion of that, because he was he saw it at such a deep level. And I've been really reminded of this sense in which this, as things accelerate more and more and become more technological and the more convenient and the more streamlined, it's interesting because in the economy's mirroring this. It seems like the basic feedback loop of general intelligence, right, is rewarded immensely in the economy in all these ways, problem-solving consciousness, right? But however, and this is why I'm wondering about, in terms of the wisdom, right? And wisdom is distinct from intelligence in the strict sense of the word, right?
Definitely.
My wisdom is the thing that has what to be intelligent, what the goals upon which you would have the problems that you would then solve. At this point, we're just solving problems.
Right.
And there's a default, it's gotten to the point where it's gotten so fast where we're solving problems that we don't have and they're turning into faster phones, more technology, where it's obvious there's no need for it, right? No one's even asking for it, but yet the atmosphere is asking for it, right?
Sure.
A momentum of its own. It's almost like we're solving a problem, and the problem ends up being everything is turned into something as a resource to collapse distances to become technological. So you have this cycle of everything is a contingency for something else, and that something else is actually already contingency for something else, and you have all of this, but there's no sense of wisdom, like Yoda in the back going oh, we're gonna die, careful, Luke.
Right. I mean, I think that virtually all the wisdom traditions help us to reflect on the difference between instrumental doing and being.
Yeah.
Right? And the difference between, means to ends and ultimate ends.
Yep.
You do to Aristotle, it's very clear about what's the ultimate end, and then everything else is an instrument, but we should be clear about what the ultimate end is.
Yeah.
Kant, you never treat another individual instrumentally. They are an end in themselves, right? What is fundamental virtue? How do we be wary of doing? You have to do sometimes, but obviously, especially in the Eastern traditions.
Right.
So we think about each one of those wisdom traditions. Now we look at the capital economy. The capital economy fundamentally is about instrumental doing to acquire more shit and consume more shit, so that you climb up some indirect marker rank and have more shit than the next guy.
Right. Totally.
And so how do we efficiently get more shit? Is essentially where all the contingency is wrapped up into. So everything is instrumental doing. I'm going to use you for instrumental. I'm going to market myself to be instrumental. I'm going to have everything to then acquire some need. And it has an atheistic scientific backdrop of mechanism. And all of that is exactly the, you try to do that, you climb that up, and then you why do you have midlife crises? And now we don't even need to wait till midlife. It's just happening in adolescence. You're like, I'm stressed, I'm pressured. I don't even know why the hell I'm doing this. What am I doing this really for?
Yeah. Totally.
And that, I think this is part of the meaning crisis, of course, that John talks about so profoundly. The acute modern meaning crisis is so many people are both, realizing these are empty calories and realizing despite all the stuff we have, we feel so alienated, or so many people feel so alienated and so hungry for something else. And that's one of our great challenges is we built a Titanic that's great at chewing up the oceans and turning them into stuff, but the earth can't take it. And quite frankly, we don't need it. We've solved the material problems. We need to get back to solving the wisdom problems and relational problems, right? It's now sit around and talk and learn and sing and dance and embody, our process. But I mean, that's not where our values or philosophies or wisdom is. And so hopefully we can awaken to that. We'll see.
Yeah, totally. And there's something about, I think that there's something about, as we're talking, it's clicking in for me even more about the one thing that I don't think that you can optimize, right, is real intimacy. Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting because if you just do the numbers, I mean, odds are we're going to turn into machines, and it'll occur like our idea, like as a good thing, and we'll turn into machines, and we'll give up all of it, and it will not have even been noticed, right? Or something like that, right?
There's certainly a transhuman fear, hope, weird thing that is that, yes. And obviously, I don't know if you saw, like, Elon Musk, released Neuralink, which, getting closer and closer, plugging stuff in. And once you get that interface, So anyway, yep.
So
that's happening.
It's so interesting. But it seems to me, though, that there's one place, and I'm sure there's other places, but there's a feedback loop in inner subjectivity, right? That to really listen to somebody, right, as an end in themselves, as a vow, right? You actually can't. You can't do that. You actually have to do it, right? Like, you actually have to not be instrumental. Like, you actually have to slow down and have that experience, right? So there is a sense in which I think it's I think you're right. I think inner subjectivity is the place that it's, on some level, it's going to be our saving grace, right? Because
it has to be.
Yeah, because it's and I think how it's going to save us is that I don't think that technology can handle the pain of that missing, right? It is missing, and it is hurting people. And on some level, we're able to get enough shiny objects, right, to not notice the meaninglessness, right?
Yep.
But I think our being can't do it, right? It can't do that ultimately. And I think our saving grace is that the technology isn't going to be able to address that pain. And I think that pain is where the wisdom's going to be, right? Yep. I think that's where it's going to be.
I agree with that. I agree with all of that. I mean, I think that, the core of our embodied being is centered around the experience of relational value. So we're born, and all of a sudden we look up and we are tracking our mother's eyes, and we are looking to see that dance immediately, that mirrored attachment contextual dance, sets the stage, and then we are hunting for whether or not we are known and valued, have influence and are valued, and those are two different things, and we can use influence and then or not, or we're injured and rejected. I mean, I just put up on the list Tom Friedman, talking about, what is the core from his analysis about what's going on? Dignity, humiliation. What's everybody's fighting to humiliate the other and claim dignity, and what are these things? These are the fundamental structures that really feed our embodied sense of meaning. And so, the fear is that we've lost so much touch with it and created systems that break that apart, and gave rise to, but, I love dialogos, I love circling, I love the idea that we're in the process of exploring psychotechnologies that could use Zoom and use communities to bring people together, and realize that we have enough material stuff taken care of, and now get back to the soul. You know, we got to get back to the embodied connection with each other,
right,
and the world.
Right, totally. All right, my friend, I'm gonna go ahead and complete. Time for me to go right again.
All right, well, good luck. You know, I'm glad that. Welcome to the academy.
Yeah, totally.
Fun, huh?
Yeah, great talking with you. Thanks, sir. This is really great. Always good talking.
Hey,
with
man.
you.
Enjoyed it a lot. Let's do it again sometime. Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Peace.